The morning it all came to a head, I was standing in my chicken coop in my pajamas holding a rooster named Gerald when a police cruiser rolled slowly up my driveway. Behind it came a pearl-white SUV with a personalized license plate that read, "Rules Gal." I didn't need to see the driver to know who it was. If you've ever worked 40 years to own a piece of land that's truly yours, land where you can hear the wind move through the grass and smell rain before it falls, then you understand why I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me without a fight. If this kind of story speaks to you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. I've got plenty more where this came from. My name is Earl, and my wife is Margaret. We've been married 31 years. We bought our 5-acre property outside of town back when property was still something an honest working man could afford. We built a small farm there, a vegetable garden, 6 chickens, 2 goats named Biscuit and Gravy, and 1 very opinionated rooster named Gerald. It was peaceful. It was ours. Then Patrice moved in next door. Patrice wasn't from around here. She'd relocated from the city about 2 years back, bought the biggest house in our little HOA neighborhood, and immediately set about making the rest of us feel like we didn't belong in our own homes. She complained about everything. My garden was too visible from the road. My goats were an eyesore. My chickens, she said, were a health hazard, a noise violation, and, I quote, completely inconsistent with the community aesthetic. She filed HOA complaints like some people collect stamps, with great enthusiasm and no real purpose. Our HOA board, 3 retired folks who mostly just wanted to keep the grass trimmed and the dues low, tried to reason with her. She responded by getting herself elected board president within 6 months. I still don't know exactly how she pulled that off, but suddenly Patrice had authority, and she intended to use every last drop of it. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. It told me I had 30 days to remove my livestock or face daily fines. I read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, and didn't say much. Margaret read it, set it back down, and went to make coffee. She's not a woman who panics. Never has been. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that Margaret had already been dealing with Patrice behind the scenes. You see, Margaret is the chief of police in our county, has been for 4 years. Before that, she spent 22 years working her way up through the department. She's quiet, she's steady, and she does not like people who abuse their authority. Sound familiar? Margaret had been receiving reports from other neighbors about Patrice. Small things, but they added up. Patrice had apparently been telling people that she had connections with law enforcement and that anyone who crossed her would regret it. She'd been using the HOA's power to intimidate elderly residents into paying for upgrades they hadn't agreed to. One neighbor, a widow named Dolores, had been fined $300 for a wind chime. Margaret was building a picture. She just needed Patrice to make one more move. I tried talking to Patrice directly. I knocked on her door one afternoon and explained, very calmly, that our property had been zoned for small-scale agriculture long before the HOA even existed, that our chickens were legal, that our goats were legal, that Gerald, for all his faults, was legal. She looked at me the way a person looks at a bug on their windshield. I don't care what it was zoned for. I care what this neighborhood looks like now, and right now, it looks like a barnyard. She smiled tightly. The police will be at your property Friday morning, Earl. I'd make sure those animals are gone by then. I went home and told Margaret. She nodded slowly, poured herself a cup of coffee, said, let her call them. I didn't sleep well Thursday night. I was up before dawn, feeding the chickens, checking on Biscuit and Gravy, scratching Gerald behind his ridiculous comb. I'd raised these animals. I wasn't just going to hand them over because a woman with a fancy SUV decided my life didn't match her vision board. Around 8:30 Friday morning, I heard the cruiser before I saw it. I walked out of the coupe, Gerald tucked under one arm, and watched it pull up. 2 officers stepped out. Young guys, both of them, looking a little uncertain, like they weren't entirely sure why they were there. Right behind them came Patrice, stepping out of that white SUV in pressed linen pants and sunglasses, holding a folder thick enough to stump a mule.
"Good morning, Earl," she said, and she was practically glowing. "I've brought the authorities as promised. I have documentation here showing clear HOA violations, an agricultural nuisance complaint, and a formal request for immediate removal of livestock." One of the officers, whose name tag said Briggs, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as apologetic. "Sir, we did receive a complaint. We're just here to—" "Where's your supervisor?" I asked quietly. Briggs blinked. "Excuse me? Your supervisor. I'd like your supervisor present before we discuss anything."
Patrice let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, Earl, do you really think calling for a supervisor is going to help you here? I have a relationship with this department. I've already spoken to people. This is happening." And that was the moment I heard the third car. It was an unmarked dark sedan, no lights, no fuss. It pulled up behind the cruiser, and the door opened and out stepped Margaret. She was in full uniform, badge on her chest, hair pulled back the way she wears it for work. She had a cup of coffee in one hand, and the kind of expression on her face that I have learned over 31 years means someone is about to have a very bad day. Both officers went rigid. Briggs actually said "Chief," and straightened up so fast I thought he might tip over. Patrice turned, looked at Margaret, looked at the badge, looked at the uniform. The color left her face in a way that reminded me of a window shade being pulled down slowly. "Good morning, gentlemen," Margaret said pleasantly. She glanced at Patrice. "And you must be the neighbor." I was told," Patrice started. "You were told you had connections in the department," Margaret said. She sipped her coffee. "You mentioned that to 4 different people in this neighborhood over the past year. It made its way back to me." She paused. "I am the department, ma'am." The folder slipped a little in Patrice's hands.
Margaret turned to Briggs. "Has anyone actually verified whether this property is in violation of any county ordinance?" Briggs cleared his throat. No, Chief, we responded to a complaint. This land has carried an agricultural use designation since 1987, Margaret said simply. HOA bylaws cannot override county zoning. The animals stay." She looked at Patrice again. "What does not stay is a pattern of using false claims of law enforcement connections to coerce and intimidate your neighbors." Patrice opened her mouth. "I'd think carefully," Margaret said, not unkindly, "because I've also spoken with Dolores about her wind chime." I wish I could tell you Patrice said something clever. She didn't. She closed her folder, walked back to her SUV, and left without another word. The officers exchanged a glance, said their goodbyes, and followed shortly after. Margaret walked over to me. Gerald ruffled his feathers and regarded her with suspicion, the way he regards everyone. "You could have told me your plan," I said. She shrugged. "I needed her to make the call herself, otherwise none of it sticks." She reached over and scratched Gerald on the head. He did not bite her. He never bites Margaret. Within 3 weeks, 4 of Patrice's HOA fines, including Dolores's wind chime, were reversed. 6 months later, Patrice listed her house and moved back to the city. The morning she left, I was in the garden. Biscuit and Gravy were sunning themselves by the fence. Gerald was crowing at nothing in particular, the way he does. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was ours.